Hi there, I'm Nadine Richardson, your host and creator of the scientifically verified childbirth education program, She Births. Our vision is to make birth better for every family around the world. And our She Births show is a place that will inspire your birth, evolve your parenting, and help you live a life you love. Today's podcast is brought to you by Water Wipes, the world's purest baby wipes, made of 99.9% water and a drop of fruit extract. You can receive a 20% discount on your first order using the code SHEBIRTHS20. Just go to shop.waterwipes.com.au and enter the code SHEBIRTHS20 to get your discount today. If you are a parent, about to be one, or a fellow health professional, join us now for an inspirational deep dive into topics with experts around the globe. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 4 of the She Births Show podcast. Today I talk with counsellor, fellow doula and childbirth educator Rhea Dempsey. Rhea is author of Birthing with Confidence, a must-read if you really want to face your fears and understand the culture of childbirth and how it impacts us all. She has helped over 1,000 women give birth and is currently writing her second book, which we are really looking forward to here in the She Births community. The fact that Rhea has been attending births for over 30 years means that she was around before the epidural arrived. She calls it the Trojan horse. Even though only 13% of She Births mums have an epidural, I would have loved to have been doula'ing in those days because so much was different in the attitudes of caregivers, in the culture of births, the timelines that were given, the expectations, and the belief system and attitude towards pain. Rhea and I have both witnessed a huge increase in the phobia of childbirth, especially that fear of pain. It's rightly so. But we ask the rather controversial question today: what are women actually missing out on when they don't feel some or the majority or all of their labour? Without the natural orchestration of hormones, do they experience a shift in brainwave patterns that takes them into an altered state of consciousness, into a deeply connected state with nature and their baby that possibly even helps you parent with more ease and responsiveness? Now, I had an epidural with my first labour, so I don't want to poo-poo that, and I think I was able to parent with ease and grace in a deeply connected way. I was humbled by labour. So don't get us wrong, we're not saying epidurals are wrong, but we want to discuss this and look at how much is going on in our birthing rooms with medical intervention rates so high. So we discuss how past traumas can be a hindrance to the birth process unfolding, but also how childbirth can be a healing process. How birth is a miraculous, amazing, natural orchestration, and ego dissolution process. And this ties closely to the underlying purpose of pain. Cultures differ, our subconscious attitudes towards birth really matter, and the views around you from others will deeply influence the choices you make and the way you feel birth, so much more than most of us realise. Rhea believes that modern birth has become far too focused these days on comfort, convenience, and control. My favourite part of our podcast is when we talk about the different archetypes of a doula. This is knowledge that will help you make the best choice when you are choosing your doula for your family, I'm sure. Like me and a lot of us who live in the very raw and real space or coalface of birth, Rhea swears a wee bit. So I hope you forgive us and enjoy the show. Rhea, it is so fantastic to have you with us. You are a wise woman in the land of birth, and I feel really honoured to speak with a fellow birth educator and doula, but also you've developed your skills. You're a counsellor, you're a grandmother, you've been helping babies come into the world for over 40 years. So I'm very humbled to have you on our show. Thank you for being here.
So wonderful to be here. Like you, passionate about birth. So we just love any chance to have a birth chat, don't we?
That's right. And hopefully this birth chat will provide insight and give tools and also provide a new perspective perhaps on what I think and see, and I reckon you agree down in Victoria and around the world with people who read your book, that the number one anxiety the majority of women have is about the pain of labour. So we're going to dive into that and talk about that quite a bit. But before we do, tell us a little bit about your own background and how you became interested in birth and then the pain of birth.
Okay. So for me, like actually many of us who go on to be sort of what we might call activists in birth, it happened really because of what happened with the birth of my own first daughter. And without really, not to have to go through the whole thing, but basically I came out of that birth, first of all, I was a physical education teacher and an outdoor adventure specialist and so on and so on. So very much in tune with my body and used to my body and the power in it and the capacity of it. And so feeling that sort of birthing a baby fitted within that sort of my area of expertise, if you like, or my area of strength in my awareness of myself. So I didn't really have any fears about birth and felt like this should all go so very well. Only to find that really in the birth process, back then I gave birth in England in one of the large teaching hospitals, that in fact her birth was really hijacked by a whole lot of things that I now understand really were just part of the routine way that birth was dealt with and so on, and came out of that birth, feeling what happened there. And then started to do a little bit of research at that point, which ideally I would have done before the birth, and found out that lots was happening to me that were not helpful to my own capacity for birthing. And so I became quite radicalized at that point, I guess, about birth. And then I'm Australian. We came back to Australia and had our next two daughters here in Melbourne, and they were both home births. So I quickly became involved in the home birth scene, and the rest is history, as is commonly said. So it was that activation in me of feeling that what I felt was possible for me in terms of how my daughter's birth would be, and how I felt that was hijacked, that made me start to question and then to get very caught up in wanting to do things differently for myself, for my own babies, but then also in that bigger picture about, I was an educator anyway, and so it just felt a natural thing to step into this role of being a childbirth educator, and here I am still now. So that was my own birth experience that brought me into the field.
Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, it is so true what you say. Often that first baby we have is an initiation, not just into motherhood, but can be an initiation into birthing work for a lot of us in the field. And yeah, I'm fascinated did you experience extreme pain in your first birth?
No, really, pain for me personally wasn't the issue. And actually, as I've reflected on that as a question, pain as an issue wasn't really such a big deal as it is now.
Yeah.
For the first probably, I would say, 15 to 20 years of my birth work. So maybe that might be an interesting, bit of journey of explaining how I'm thinking about that.
That's right. Yeah.
So for me, in terms of that first birth, firstly that idea that pain in childbirth is really around, we've got to talk about that reframing, is about normal, functional, physiological pain of your body just working strong and hard. And I had that, I was on top of that. So the birth, that wasn't the issue. The issue was really not really understanding. I went into that hospital thinking that whatever they were going to do to me and offer to me was about increasing my possibility of birthing my baby. That birthing that baby. We didn't even talk about normal physiological childbirth at that point. I guess we were talking about natural birth. So I felt that what they were offering me would be supporting my power and capacity for birthing my baby, only to find that, in fact, that really wasn't their agenda. And so it was a mismatch. And I think that's still the case for many, many women who probably feel like me and probably like you, going into their first birth, that they feel like they've got it, that they're healthy, they're well, they're prepared and what have you, and feel like what's on offer in terms of our culture, in terms of, in particular, given that 98% of babies are born in hospitals, that, you know, what's on offer in the hospital and the way we're treated and what's suggested to us and what have you is in our interest in terms of boosting our capacity to do the work of the labour. When I came to know quite quickly after the birth of my first baby that that's not really, that wasn't the exchange. So the radicalising wasn't anything really to do, for me, wasn't anything to do with pain and what was happening there, but really about the choices I was making, the way I was treated when I was, if you like, not being compliant with what they were suggesting or wanting me to do, and all of that side of things. So that then presupposed the sort of move towards home birth for me. And then being involved in the home birth scene, certainly through the sort of 70s, late 70s to the late 90s, I would think in my working life, that was, in the home birth scene, pain wasn't the issue either. Because basically, you know, in the home birth scene, you've got people who know a thing or two about how to soothe the woman and to suggest how she can work with her body, as well as the mothers themselves were, their home births at that point definitely were coming out of sort of lived values of working with our bodies, trusting our bodies, knowing that, you know, normal processes of birth have some intensity about them, and that's just part of the deal. As well, I guess that wasn't only the home birth scene, but also the birth centre scene, which in Melbourne at that point we had, or through that time, those 20 years, we had 6 birth centres here, and that was all about supporting natural birth or normal physiological childbirth, as I call it now. So pain for a long time wasn't really the issue in my education with couples, neither in the doula work that I was doing at that point. That wasn't, maybe it was more in terms of stamina, because oftentimes, particularly with those first babies, the labours are longer than we can, than we like or that we can imagine. So more in terms of stamina and normalising, you know, the shifts and changes that are happening, but not so much this big neon lights, pain aspect that has become certainly what I talk about a lot now, and is you know, one of the top sort of fears, as you say, that women are having. So this, I think that for me, having that, you know, the privilege really of doing this work for over all these years, 40 years, seeing these social changes, I've had a bit of not an outsider's, but I'm looking at it across the spectrum of change. And so that issue of, back then, just to say, we'll come to pain in a minute, but back then, you know, these issues were much more about which it still is, that power over, you know, what's happening in the hospital or in the dominant systems, and the power over, and how there's a controlling mechanism about how women are shaped and treated and expected to behave in those settings. And so we started to talk about choices. And the choices back then were, you know, well, to not be shaved, not have an enema, is starting to talk about not lying on our backs in beds, which of course came out of that powerful change that happened when Janet Velasquez dropped that book, Active Birth, into the consciousness of those of us working around natural birth. Because even in the early home birth scene, we were lying on our backs, admittedly in our own beds, but we were still lying on our backs. It was so embedded. So that powerful. It
kills me. It absolutely kills me. Like I even in, you know, primal cultures, or transitioning towards more modern methods in birthing centres in developing countries, now you see women again, they just lie flat on their back like a cockroach, their arms and legs flailing, thinking that this is the ladylike way to give birth. It's it's a tragedy. It's inhumane to not include active birthing in and Janet's work still in our curriculum today. It's essential.
Just powerful. So you can probably imagine then just how that was so powerful at the time that came. And so then we that was really our focus. All of those things were really not. So the pain was like a side issue. It was about, well, how can we make these birthing bodies work? How do we surrender and work with our body, the physicality of our body, the way the body is designed in order to give birth? How do we do that? And how do we do that in a context where, in fact, women were still in the hospital being encouraged to be lying down and stirrups and all of that. So it was more around the sort of radicalizing of choice issues and that sort of fight, as well as, of course, getting those fathers into the birth space and having them in. So they were the sort of bigger issues or the biggest issues that were there. And just the pain was, well, that was just that intensity of the labour. That was part of the deal.
Yeah.
Than it being, the deal. So as I was thinking about that, I guess maybe another part of that was, though, that what we saw, so even in the context of the home birth or the birth centre, or in the situations where women were working well with their bodies and the physicality was sort of being embraced, for some women there were times in the labour that were particularly psychologically and emotionally painful. And I came to talk about those as being, where women, as we came to understand it, who had particular life issues, would reach what I called places of challenge. There'd be particular places of challenge in the labour which would throw up this more emotional and psychological distress that we would see. So not necessarily, the physicality of the pain and the body, but really the emotions. And so a large part of our early work in the home birth and even doula'ing in the hospital was really, and because we were working in what would now be called continuity of care ways in terms of knowing the woman, so we could have some forethought in terms of knowing the woman, knowing her story, knowing the relationships, and that maybe we could predict that maybe at this point in the labour that might be more challenging and we might have to give some more support to work through those issues. So that was where we were around all of those things. And I guess in so much of this was documented, of course, by the Americans in the reclaiming of home birth, which was happening exactly the same here in Australia, but they were writing about it, Ina May's work, of course, being the most well-known, where we're talking about, well, what's going on for the woman and what's her life and what's happening in her relationships, and this has an impact on birth. So that was where we were working so strongly.
Yeah. Amazing. I totally wish I'd had you as my birth educator and also as my doula, because I think cottoned on during my pregnancy to the fact that I was not getting the care I needed. And it wasn't getting enough continuity, wasn't getting the support. There was kind of like this, you're young, you're a yoga teacher, you'll be fine kind of attitude. And misdiagnoses and misprescribing was going on. And I spoke to my dad, who's a doctor and has spent quite a bit of time in rural obstetrics or very remote obstetrics in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean. Uh-huh. And he said to me, Nadine, birth is just women's business. And, if they've got like a home birthing thing or an independent midwife, I'll get it for you. Because we were young and we were broke and we got our beautiful independent midwife. But even then I wasn't educated to the fact that birth was a psychosocial experience as well. Yeah. And I was expecting my midwife to be there for me, holding my hand, helping me peel the onion within my own psyche as my fears arose. Yeah. And pain hadn't really been talked about in birth education because this was like 17 years ago. Yeah. It was like, yeah, you'll be fine. You just breathe and you just kind of move and you'll work it out. And to a certain extent that was kind of okay. But it was those emotional blocks and those vulnerabilities and that unraveling process in my mind, in my heart, that definitely got in the way of my labour. And is it even possible to unravel those things, you think, in the moment during the birth process, or do we need to have uncovered some of them or a lot of them before the birth process? What do you think?
I think both are possible because certainly if women know that they do have what, so in my language now I talk about wildcards. So these can be life issues that can impact on a transition to mothering. And so, of course, the transition to mothering is embodied in the birth process. So if there are any life issues, relationship issues with family, with partners and so on, that can tap into something that is more of a challenge for some women than for others, or challenges of the body because of life traumas or life experiences, then if women know that, then ideally they'll be supported to or encouraged to do some work on that in the pregnancy, because certainly regardless of what happens about the birth, pretty well most of those things will be there in the postnatal arena. So doing something on them to get some support or to work through them as much as possible beforehand is better, not only for the birth, but certainly for that early time with the baby. So that certainly would be good. But, the thing about birth is, of course, so much energy available, so much powerful energy available with good people around you. You could do, I joke, but I've witnessed it so many times. You could do 10 years of therapy in 10 minutes in a labour with that potency running through your body and good people witnessing and holding and
absolutely
honouring the power of that transformational, transcendent power that can just burn away some of that stuff to make a clarity for the mother as she's coming into.
Absolutely. And I actually think that birth and labour is a pathway to enlightenment. I see it as a Vedic or a yogic rite of passage to awaken consciousness. And the pain is actually part of that. I don't know if you've read Naomi Wolf's book, Vagina, which my son was very devastated that I had on the dining table one afternoon and all his friends came over. But she talks so beautifully about how the vagina, in a sense, and the neural networks, these golden threads, these fibers that are woven differently in the pelvic space for each woman, totally unique, how important they are to our they are the seat of consciousness, and they have a direct connection to our brains. And I really believe that the pain, we say in yoga, pain is there to make you aware. And a personal trainer says, pain is just fear leaving your body. And both of those sort of ideas, analogies are, appropriate. But there is something in the awakening of those neural networks and those fibers and connecting a woman into her base from the spirit of this child coming through into the earth that shifts her consciousness, shifts her sense of power, and is an awakening process. And it is equivalent to at least 10 years sitting in a cave on your own. I know what I'd rather do. I'd just rather go through labour again personally.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. For some of us, perhaps we might need to have 10 children to get there, but we may not want to do that. But yes, so such a fantastic energy available. So that was my experience, our experience in that early time. So this issue of pain, just maybe to come back to that, it became, so for me, I guess in asking that question, about when did I start to talk about pain in the way that I do now, which is a huge part of, I guess, the body of work that people would know me for. It didn't really happen until probably the late 90s. And there was a particular birth, as often there is, these teaching births that just show us something new or deepen our awareness about something. So there was a particular birth, and I've written about it in that first book of mine, where I knew that the mother did have one of these life stories that to me would have predicted that it was going to be quite a difficult birth, and she was on the case about it, and was part of the reason she had me at the birth, to really be going to a birth centre and wanting to do the work both in the pregnancy and also to be supported during the labour. But without going on fully about the birth, but what happened was there was a mismatch between the midwife, the birth centre midwife, is an experienced midwife, who felt that the mother was in transition because of the distress that she was presenting, and called me quickly to the birth, whereas I felt, knowing the mother's story, that in fact she wasn't really in transition. I thought she was much earlier in the labour, and this was predictably the sort of psychological distress that I imagined was coming out of her life story. Anyway, one thing that led to another. Eventually, the midwife did do a vaginal examination and found exactly that the mother was 1 to 2 centimetres and not really, nearly 10 centimetres and ready to push her baby out. She had a beautiful team around her, the mother, the midwife included, to be able to regroup and go home and come back and eventually give birth with a tough labour, but eventually give birth as she had intended in the tub at the birth centre. But that, I was surprised more by the midwife misreading this. And so I was talking to her and asking her, do you ever have any other, because I guess at that point people were talking about, well, the point in the labour when women would get distressed and that the pain would get too much was transition.
Of course, that's what everyone says. The moment you ask for the epidural, you have to be 8 centimetres.
Yes, 8 to 10 centimetres. So that's what the midwife was working on, whereas I guess with our home birth stories, we knew more intimately the women, and so maybe we were tuned much more to the psychological other rather than the medical. And anyway, so I was surprised, and I started to talk to other midwives and other women. Actually, at that point, I was doing weekly pregnancy classes and weekly postnatal classes, and so I was talking about this a bit more, about this discrepancy, and so I started to hear this a bit more, that, oh yes, people were thinking I was in transition, but I was much earlier and I was distressed. And so then I started to talk about this idea of crisis of confidence. This is my phys ed background, coming where you might, if you're a runner or a swimmer or something, you might be talking about hitting a pain barrier, or probably yoga teachers talk about that as well, maybe language, but that idea of reaching a point where you feel like it's all too much.
Yep.
And you can't go forward, or you don't want to go forward, or why did you do this in the first place? So I was very familiar with that, and knowing that in the physical education sense and outdoor adventure sense, that many people can do lots of things with their bodies, but when they reach these pain barriers, or what I've come to call crisis of confidence, it's what the mind and the feeling state are saying rather than what the body is capable of. And so if the mind and the feelings are saying, so it's a little like fear, it's not only about fear, it's about distress, and if that hijacks the situation, well, of course, the body will follow that rather than following its true capacity. So I was feeling like this happens in birth. I'd known this happens in birth. So I then started to talk about this idea of a crisis of confidence, and the more I talked about it and the more I was sort of just opening my thoughts to maybe there's something different going on here, because I guess in a way through that 20 years I was a little bit protected from the bigger picture about birth because of being in the home scene, the birth centre scene, and the women generally who are wanting those sorts of births and that I was involved with and coming to my classes were women who I now call willing women, who are still women who were still in touch with that capacity and that wish and that want and that yearning to birth their babies naturally, normally. But just a bit more widely now looking and seeing that actually something major had changed, I felt. And I'm going to just have to go a bit sideways here to put this together. Because just to step back, because I think one of the key things that was happening that we were protected from, by we, I mean those of us working in the arena that I was working in, we were protected from what was happening because of the fucking epidurals. They came in the, so I was involved in birth before epidurals were around being used in birth at all.
Can I just have to pause and just say, I can't imagine attending a birth without an epidural being available. What did people do before the epidural? I know that's what everyone's thinking. What did you do?
Well,
what happened? If pain got too much or dilation didn't happen, what was there, just morphine and gas, or what happened for that woman?
Well, in the context where I was working, if that was happening, then we would be reading, well, okay, what's going on emotionally? And we would be unpacking that.
Awesome.
So just another little side. So which isn't to say that, because certainly back when I had my own first baby in the 70s, second half of the 70s, part of what was just routine in the hospital was that, you know, pretty much as soon as you were there and you're having a few strong contractions, they would, without asking, just shove in some pethidine.
Yeah.
Morphine. So it's not that those drugs weren't used, but they weren't that women were asking for them. It was just like, this is the routine measure. You do this, then we give you this, and so on. So
I've heard this story many times from my own mother. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the natural birth movement came out of, combined with that idea of wanting to be making choices, saying, well, no, I don't want that, and I don't want to be shaved, and I don't want to be in stirrups. I want to be with active birth. I want to be up. I want to be moving. So working in that arena, so the thing about points, as I said, it was about having to work with stamina and so on like that, but rather than the big deal about the pain. So when epidurals came in the mid-80s, those of us working in that way, we welcomed them in, because what we were feeling was, well, sometimes in some of those births, even perhaps if it's a home birth that we've transferred because the baby's really in a very difficult position, or, you know, for some reason we couldn't get a handle on or work past something emotionally that was going on, and long labour and very difficult, and felt, or that forceps may have been needed, and just feeling epidural, or Caesar, that here the woman could be awake and conscious and aware and ready to greet her baby with that support of the epidural in those situations where things are not working. And so we sort of welcomed them in. We sadly apologise. I apologise to all present women that we did not have the foresight to understand that those epidurals would actually come to hijack just about everything about normal physiological childbirth. And so now they're embedded in everybody's brain, and that one could be pain-free. So not just, I guess everything before that, like doing some breathing, doing some rock and roll, doing some massage, doing this, doing that, all of those things are about maybe taking the edge off, give support for working with that intensity in your body. But the promise, the seduction of the epidural is that it can all be taken away. And so for women at any point then in labour where they're feeling like they're a bit challenged, of course, the seduction of the epidural just seems like it's the answer. And certainly socially and culturally it's done that work. So but the epidural in the first instance for us, closeted away in the home birth scene and the birth centres and what have you, was sort of like, it was a good tool that was just out there when you needed it, and we weren't, or I wasn't, I don't know whether other people were, but we weren't talking about it and we weren't looking at it in terms of this bigger cultural shift. So when so back to that story where there was this mismatch about well, is it transition or is it earlier in the labour, this idea of coming to this idea about this crisis of confidence, I started then to see, no, this is really shifted, and that the epidural was really part of that, because women, I mean, we'd have to put in there also that, you know, sedentary lifestyles a bit more, we're not having to labour so much in our everyday home life, work life. We're not out in the fields anymore. We're not even, like my mother, you know, pounding the washing with the stick and doing a lot of things where physically we're very active in our lives. And so childbirth and the extra intensity of childbirth was just sort of a step into a bit of a more intense experience of just working with a strong body that's doing a lot of, labouring, if you like. So that was a number of things that were happening, but epidural, certainly the seduction of the epidural was part of the picture, which meant that it seemed to me that women were getting to these points of distress much earlier in the labour, and that because there was sort of no message or no lived experience of just feeling, oh yeah, it's a bit tough, let's just keep going, it'll be all right. And that way back when, transition was the point when women were finding that it became overwhelming, because they could sort of normalise a lot of what was happening up until that point, in terms of just a strong expression of their body working hard. So starting then to get a bit of a handle on that as a bigger picture, and then starting to see that creeping in even to the women who were coming to my classes or births that I was going to, where this embedded sort of cultural, social message, seduction, was happening for women that, as a doula, birth worker, we all started to have to work a lot harder. And also in the home birth scene, because it's like epidural, it's there, the knowledge of it is there, the seduction of it is there, and so for women birthing now, in order to take up the challenge for normal physiological childbirth, it's like that is a real hurdle that everybody has to acknowledge and to overcome. So that's a very different part of the whole situation. So things socially and culturally had shifted.
Absolutely. And I think there's always an interplay of different influences as well. I think even in the 10 years I've been teaching she births, I would say that more and more the people that come in it's gone from being an anxiety about birth, a healthy sense of trepidation perhaps about an intense rite of passage that's coming their way that drives them to take education and prepare, to, I would say, a chronic phobia, a collective chronic phobia that we're living in. And absolutely the epidural and the seduction of that, combined with, I think, the media's portrayal of birth as this medicalized, traumatic, non-agency experience, if that's even the right term, but in a sense you can't do anything at all and birth has to be done to you, and it's comical and it's overwhelming and becomes a terrifying experience. And even in the last 10 years, I think since the access to mobile phones and YouTube clips, and there's no discernment in this so-called age of information, there's no wisdom being passed through in this footage that's just being thrown out into the ether that people have such easy access to. I think it's created this chronic phobia now. And, combine that with other things and systems and medico litigation issues and a whole lot of other stuff. You've got a whole bunch of women just maybe not even willing.
Yes, well, definitely. And, they're well catered for, actually, in the birth culture. So if I might just say one or two things at that sort of social and cultural level, the way I've come to frame it is the aspect of, so I talk about the 3 C's, in this, first of all, we're in a labour bypass era. Women don't have to labour anymore if they don't want to. So that's the promise of elective Caesar. So the promise of many of the interventions, all of the interventions in birth have been brilliant interventions designed for situations when some mums and babies are in some difficulty, and using the interventions makes for a better outcome for that mum and baby. Yeah. So all those interventions, they have their place. But what's happened to my witnessing it over time, and this isn't only contained to birth, it's a bigger picture in terms of medical care, I guess, is that many medical interventions had slipped the bounds of medical need and shifted into the realm of social choice. And not only that, but they've shifted into the realm of social expectation. So that in birth, then that leads to this, what I call this labour bypass era, where we don't as a culture value anymore the process of women labouring, working with their body, the hormones and all of that. That's not seen as important. What's seen as important is, the healthy baby and the healthy mother, to whatever degree we're thinking about that. So women are not really supported at a cultural and social level to feel like taking on the work of the labouring, the birthing, is important anymore. So that's that labour bypass era. So you could just as easily have the baby elective Caesar as you could. The other way, of course, is that you might labour, but you don't have to feel it anymore. So this is the promise, the seduction of the epidural. So the first C stands for comfort, and this has really happened because of the epidural. So that now the cultural message is, and this is embedded in the mother's feeling state, is that you should be comfortable in labour. You should be comfortable, you poor thing. So it's sort of demonising labour pain and pitying labour in women and giving them the message that they should be comfortable. They could and should. So this is that undermining of the epidural. They also, as part of that and that shift of interventions into the social realm, social choice realm, is the issue of convenience. The birth should now be convenient. Well, you and I know that if we're thinking about normal physiological childbirth, it's like a 4 or 5 week period that baby might call the shots and say, yes, I'm ready. Are you ready, Mum? Let's rock and roll. So lifestyles, a whole lot of factors play into really to be waiting graciously on a baby over a long period of time is very inconvenient for not only the mother having to then be dealing with being pregnant at that point, but with partners, with the extended family, with people, who so much more convenient when you what day the baby was going to be born and the induction or the Caesar or what have you. Of course, no time greater in the span of the year than coming up to Christmas, where that pressure, that social expectation, that pressure to try and make birth convenient so that family plans and things, it's quite socially insidious, I think, so that for women who are wanting to honour their body, their baby's timing and the normal process, they've got a lot of pressures around them too about, well, it's not very convenient, when am I going to take that time off work, when are we going to be flying down to meet the grandchild, and because the interventions have slipped out of that realm of just being around medical need and are seen as having no consequence apart from, well, we could just make a convenient choice about what day the baby's going to be born. So that's another part of what's coming. And the third C I call the control.
Yeah.
Yeah, and part of this is the control, this has always been there, I think, since we've really systemised birth, and this happened pretty much when we took birth out of being more based at home and put it into hospitals, which was generally after the First World War in many cultures. So then you've got systems that have to cope with, women and babies coming through. So bureaucratic control about who's coming in and who's going out and how we staff it and all of that stuff is part of the picture. And it's a stronger part of the picture just at the moment because I'm pretty sure all across Australia, all of the major hospitals are totally under the pump in terms of the numbers of births that are happening. So they need to be sort of controlling their systems in a way. But not only that, I think that's also come now to an internal feeling in women that they should be in control of themselves. So that, for the women that I work with, or certainly in the early home births, what we were working with was that idea of surrendering to the body, surrendering to the shift in consciousness, surrendering to this great mystery of what birth could be and where it could take us in our awareness and consciousness. But now there's much more of a feeling of controlling how I behave, controlling how I am, controlling being in that sort of short, sort of narrow comfort zone, both mentally, emotionally, socially, physically, and probably even spiritually. Yeah. So there's a lot of control factors that are going on. And so then, in a way, that promise of comfort, the promise of convenience and the promise of control makes the decision-making much more complex, which then makes the idea, well, what decision should I make, which is right, which puts us into the realm of fears and risk and what have you. And it's just, it's exhausting. It's amazing to me that anybody gets pregnant anymore, really. There's so much of that going on. So I think these are whether women are totally conscious about this is it's just the underlying territory now that they're dealing with, that they're working with. And probably another part of that is the shift in women's lives anyway themselves, because again, across that 40 years, way back then when I started, most women, when I had my first baby, it was still in the era when as soon as you were pregnant, pretty well you couldn't work anymore. So I'm not saying...
Wow.
Exactly. So I'm not saying we go back there, but we're at a point now for many women, given that for many women still the pathway into that world of work is still a sort of a male patterned pathway. So I started to talk probably again, maybe in the 90s in my classes about this tension between the woman in the world and the mother at home. And that was starting to shape up socially, culturally, and within relationships. And it's being talked about much more. There's just a new book come out here in Melbourne, in fact, by a feminist academic looking at mothering issues, and she talks about that, that split is not between two different types of mothers, but that's a split within each mother themselves. And that given that being that woman who is that individual who works, is out in the working world, and that's a more masculine style of presence, then there's that challenge about how does one then trust and surrender to the body, the mothering body, the female mothering body, the birthing body. And of course, anyway, it would just be so much convenient to know you can have the baby on that day, and then you can give up work at that point, and then you can go back to work at that point. So it's much more complex than the individual woman and what it is that she's wishing and wanting, because she's really being influenced by these bigger social contexts as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's your biggest gift to the birthing woman and to all of us working in birth, is that you bring into the forefront the underlying territory, the cultures, and people have to wake up and see that they are being played by that. You are plugged into that, whether you like it or not. And unless we look at our history and what's happened in the past and start to consider where this all could go, you actually can't make potentially conscious choices about your own birth as well. Because, as you said, it's fantastic that women started to focus on I have a choice and demanding that they can choose their way of delivering, birthing off their backs. And I remember when I was pregnant, my mother-in-law said to me, well, when are they going to shave you, and are they going to give you an enema? And no, we don't do that anymore, Nana. But thank God. But now Millie Hill in England put out a survey that thousands of women answered and asked, what do you want in your birth? And just like you said, the C word came back. Women said they want control. And that's part, again, of the masculine style. The masculine energy is about goals and is about achievement and linear movement and controlling in order to reach a particular goal. And I think we need to reframe and educate people about what opportunities exist by letting go of control and the beauty of mystery and spiritual control. That's the worst kind. But we need to open the portal to the potential of great beauty that comes from experiencing pain and working with your body, and the power of a team and support and all of these things that we know as birth attendants can bring about such amazing magic. And that's what it is. It's about letting go of control and having faith in nature and in the divine and yourself as a part of that, right?
Yes, exactly. I think that there are women who want to choose what's on offer, and they're well served in terms of being able to make birth convenient and comfortable and to have that control. I feel like, and certainly there are also women at the other end of the spectrum who are attuned to this and who are what I'd call savvy and are making the choices in order to honour their capacity about birthing and to do that surrender. I guess that I'm hoping, and probably I'm sure that you are, that because I feel like there's a large body of women who still have a yearning, still have some sort of yearning about what is this mystery about birth, what is this mystery about the power in my body, and some sort of yearning to connect with that, but the cultural messages and the fear and what have you hijack them, or they don't understand that they've got to be really on the case about the sort of choices they're going to make in order to support them to surrender into that yearning and into that birth experience, because it's pretty well skewed towards a different way of birth. And I think that there are some women who just really aren't aware of that. And so they're feeling that, they have aspirational values about how they'll be in the birth.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily lived values in the first place about how they are with their body generally. they're also aspirational in terms of that I can do it in regardless of what the scenario is. I can go into that private hospital there, or I can go in the hospital just down the corner, or what have you, and that is like a level playing field, and wherever I go, it's about me and what I'll bring to it rather than how I'll interact in that space, or how much power over, how much control I'll be able to keep, or how much the power over what happens in that birth space. So a lot of them are not informed or aware about what that is, and are just in that sort of aspirational value of, yes, I'm going to, my birthing goddess will come out in me because that's what I want to have happen, without really any embedded sort of life experience or embedded physical experience to understand what that might take and what that might mean.
That's right.
Because, of course, we have to also put into that picture for many women, and again, this is the social and cultural context, and of course it has great positivity about it as well as undermining aspects, is of course even in the realm of our menstrual cycle and the rhythm of our bleeding. Of course, we're now, particularly if we're working, there's so many pressures to control all of that. So where have we got lived experience of surrendering to that female, the rhythm and potency and magic of the female body, and then women expect to be separated from all of that through their general life, and then to be able to just tap into it like click their fingers aspirationally and the birth will go beautifully. And of course they find that that's not the case, and that what's on offer to them doesn't really support them for that, and then we have a lot of wounding in birth because of it. So I think there's a deeper understanding that women who have that yearning, that yes, it is possible, and certainly the research around the world absolutely backs that it's possible. And so there's big political change work that needs to be done too, and there are many midwives and midwifery academics who are doing their best to bring change into the hospital system to make it more in tune with what these women who have this yearning are wanting and needing. Continuity of care, of course, being one of the gold standard. So I'm hopeful that there's sort of a bit of change around it, but in the meantime, those of us who feel to be educators, really talking in particular to those women who we have a sense have that yearning, but they're not yet really clear about how to unpack the social and cultural story, unpack their own story, and to sort of be in touch with doing the work that would provide that foundation for having the birth that they really truly are desiring, and with everything coming together could happen.
Yep, I agree. So why is it, we've interviewed Dr. Sarah Buckley and we talked about this extraordinary concoction of hormones that flood through a woman's body during the induction or the beginnings of labour and throughout the process of birth, and peaking in the hour after birth, the oxytocin, the endorphins, the shift of consciousness that can happen from this flooding of the brain and the body. Why do you think it's important then that we experience pain? We know that epidurals will interrupt those hormones, but are there other reasons that we could embrace the pain? Because having an attitude towards the pain certainly makes it easier. Pain is in our own individual perception, right? And we can all experience things differently, but certainly an attitude towards it, a favourable attitude toward it's going to make it easier. So what would be like the carrot on the stick for the woman who's like, oh, why should I really bother? I'm going to get some hormones if I have some labour. What do you think?
Yeah, so certainly Sarah will have spoken about this much more eloquently and with greater depth and understanding. So tagging a little bit on top of that, just so grateful to her for her. Well, of course, we're claiming her as an Australian, even though she was born in New Zealand, but all of those New Zealanders who do brilliant things, we claim them. So Sister Sarah, yes, that beautiful work. What I would say, or what I say to really simplify all of that, and again, because of my phys ed background, I'm usually talking about it in terms of birth, but also trying to tap it into other experiences that people might have had or at least have a sense about. And because one of the key hormonal connectors to me, which is so I talk about this as an evolutionary regression. And that pain is a crucial part of that process happening. So we first of all have to understand, of course, that we're talking about functional physiological pain of the body working strong and hard at peak performance levels. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about birth. We're not talking about pathological pain of the body in damage or danger or accidents or things going wrong. And that even that is such a hard thing for women and partners to get hold of, because, of course, we've stuck birth into a hospital where pain that is strong and escalating is always about, you know, in other contexts of all the stuff that happens in hospital, it's about damage, danger, accidents, illness. So there's such a subtle sort of mingling of them placing birth as a normal, functional, healthy process of the body with a strong physicality and functional pain, placing it in that hospital setting, then, of course, it starts to blur all of that to claim. I think we should start to do, you know, have birth in yoga studios or even
We've had a few mucus plugs fall out in the yoga studio. No rupture of membranes, but we've certainly had lots of pre-labouring women in the yoga studio. Yeah.
But I mean, even if we were to put, you know, start to put birth in the, I'm sort of joking, it's probably not the most ideal, but to shift this attitude, you know, if we're to do it in the weights room at the local gym where people are working hard with functional physiological pain. Anyway, just to...
That's a good... I think that's a great visual, actually. Yeah.
To reframe it from placing it in a hospital where, you know, all the best drugs and juice is there, to deal with, quite rightly, pain that's coming from something that's not going well in the body.
That's right, yeah.
We're talking about something where everything is going brilliantly in the body. And in fact, you know, one of the things that I say that I do first used to do as a bit of a throwaway, but for so many people, this seemed to be just one of my golden messages. Who would have thought? And that was to say that pretty well in birth, there are some things that can be not straightforward. And pretty well none of them are going to show up as pain. They are going to show up in heartbeats and pulses and blood pressure and baby's heartbeat and so on, the things that are being watched over. That, you know, that the pain, you can trust the pain is about what's happening when the body is working well.
Yeah, it's a good sign that your body's making a big, strong, efficient contraction generally and bringing your baby down and into the world.
And so the fact that in labour it's an intensifying process, you know, starting at a lesser level of intensity and moving to, and that's brilliant. That's how what we're wanting and understanding is best. So that's in the medical context of a hospital, it's like a pain that's starting less and is getting worse and worse and worse, then something obviously is getting more and more dangerous. Whereas in birth, no, everything is getting better and better and better. I use that other analogy. I don't know what it would be in Sydney, but in Melbourne, it's like you're doing a fun run. You know, you're starting at the base of Mount Dandenong, and the fun run is finishing up the top of Mount Dandenong, and that's that intensification of that effort to get there is the framework for a birth. You know, rather than feeling like it shouldn't be getting any stronger. So there's a lot of education, a lot of reframing that we have to have about this normal physiological functional pain of the body working strong and hard at peak performance levels. So I'm doing everything I can, not only to describe, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment, about what's happening in birth and why it's important, but to just frame it in other things that people do in their lives, that they would take on that bike ride or that fun run or that. And they know the fun run, you know, it's not much fun. It's fun at the start, but in the midst, it's a bit of hard work, and they do it willingly. And we celebrate it. We value it. We think it's brilliant. And yet somehow or other we've got this whole pitying of labouring women. We, you know, anyway, I could go on about that. So, so the thing then is that intense, brilliant work of the body, that functional physiological pain of that labour that's working so beautifully with those big contractions, when that functional physiological pain reaches a certain intensity, and this has got to be understood as separate from the sort of freaking out pain that can come when women are being hijacked by their anxiety.
Yes.
as opposed to a woman where the labour, she's supported and able to surrender, and the contractions are just building and building as they're designed to do. So it's not just when she's feeling in pain that this will happen. It's really around a physiological process, generally happening somewhere around that 6 to 7 centimetres. And at that point, when the functional physiological pain reaches the sort of particular intensity, that this then kicks over the endorphin system. And the endorphins, as we know, are our feel-good hormones. They're akin to the sort of natural opiates in our body. And that when those endorphins come through, they give some moderation to the pain. And that's very important that we educate that,
Absolutely.
Moderation, they don't take it away. This is that, it's like the benchmark now is epidural that can take it away. So is it anything like that? Well, no, not really. So the endorphins can give some moderation, but more importantly is the other part of what endorphins do. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but it's very important for people to understand also that this is why people go and do fun runs. It's why people do get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and pound the pavement, because they are looking for that, reaching that, pain barrier and moving through that pain barrier and getting that runner's high or that bike rider's high or that weightlifter's high or that yoga high or what have you. When their endorphins come in, if they go through a pain barrier, it's part of the deal of why they're doing it. And those endorphins in that situation, just like in birth, they give an uplift. And they also bring an internal, because it's shifting brain waves and bringing an internal focus to the running, the bike riding, the whatever it is, to boost their rhythm to keep going. So in birthing, we have all of this is on tap. You don't even have to get up. You might have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, but this is all on tap in birth. So when when the functional physiological pain has reached such a state, as I'm saying, around 6 to 7 centimetres, and then the endorphins come in, they give some moderation. But the key thing they do that is so important is that they swamp the cerebral cortex in a similar way to if we did have a whack of opiates if you've ever seen somebody or on telly or what have you, and people just go on the nod, they're not talking, they're not present anymore. But this is what the endorphins offer the mother. They take out the cerebral cortex, which is brilliant for most of the things that we use it for in life, but it is useless in terms of birthing. So the sooner it's out of the picture, the better everything is going to go. I mean, we those of us who work in this, we can't wait, and we love to see this process where these endorphins come through. The mother is going through this, generally a crisis of confidence. She feels she can't go on. She's supported to surrender to it. Then the endorphins come through. Then she goes into this deep space, a primal space, and then really we could just sit back and enjoy the show from there on in, because we know it's going to go so beautifully. So that link between the functional physiological pain and the endorphins, and in fact labouring women get stronger hits of endorphins than anybody pounding the pavement or doing that fun run.
That's right.
High level of endorphins that come from the functional physiological pain of their body working. So when that happens, we see women surrendering into this what I call an evolutionary regression, taking out the cerebral cortex so that the primal brainstem, the parts of our whole bodily systems and mental and emotional and physical systems who know how to birth, those instincts come forward, and then women drop into that place where they then are enabled through the hormones to drop into their instincts, really, their birthing instincts. And of course, when they do that, then they're more alive to the instincts of their body. And so then when the baby's born, if that doesn't get disturbed, they're alive to their instincts to respond to the baby. The baby is, of course, the well and healthy baby is, of course, primed to be bodily in touch with its instincts. And so the mother and the baby then, with that normal physiological childbirth, which is orchestrated by this complexity of hormones, and particularly the pain being one of the big triggers to trigger the endorphins, which brings the instincts to the fore rather than staying in the thinking brain. So then we have that privilege of seeing that mother respond to that baby that baby respond to that mother in that instinctive way that probably we always as human beings have responded to our babies.
Mm.
Those of us who have the privilege of seeing women working with normal physiological childbirth and supporting that see this over and over and over again, and so that the mother and the baby then are in a shared consciousness, a shared physicality of instinctive human, deeply human ways of responding to one another. And then, not that that takes care of all of the challenges of early mothering and going forward in mothering, but that foundation of an instinctive place of knowing how to be through the body, as opposed to so many women postnatally now not contacting that in their bodies, staying in their cerebral cortex, and then having to read and learn and trying to develop their instincts through thinking about how you should be with a body and how you should a baby and hold a baby and do this to a baby. So this is, I think, one of the great gifts of normal physiological childbirth and one of the big sadnesses I feel in terms of what's happening when women are not encouraged, supported or educated to understand how important this is and to support them to go there. Because what happens, of course, once that epidural comes in, which it so often does, particularly at this crucial point, it's so sad to me to hear these stories, and I do far too much birth debriefing, and I hear this, that right at this magic point around that 6 to 7 centimetres, when these big shifts in the hormones, the shift in the consciousness, the shift in this evolutionary regression, which of course can for a lot of women push up their control mechanism, that they want to stay in control rather than drop into that evolutionary regression, that primal state. And at this point there's a lot of distress and the pain feels so strong, and so that's the point at which they choose the epidural. And of course when they choose the epidural, it takes all of that out. It takes out that link between, it blows the oxytocin, it blows the link with endorphins, so that we're not getting that happening. So women then are pretty much just in their absolutely everyday normal cerebral cortex consciousness.
Yeah.
They stay there all through the rest of the labour. They stay there when they're trying to welcome their baby and they're thinking about what they should do with their baby, and they have never gone into that deeper state where their instincts will be awakened to be present through the body with the baby. So it's a big thing, and it's happening, and I think it's worrying thinking going forward. So about trying to explain and the thing about that is, of course, it's only some of us who ever actually now get to see it in our culture. I'm lucky to have seen it pretty well in most of the births I've ever been at, and that's close on 1,500 now. Seeing it over and over and over again, seeing the pattern of it, seeing how that works. But even now, midwives are not seeing that anymore. Most obstetricians working have never seen it, so they don't know how to trust it.
Well, again, they're also not seeing birth across such a long period of time and with that in-depth connection to the woman that we do as well. So popping in at certain moments where there is a distress or, it's just like your story of the 2 and 8 centimetre, like it can often be misinterpretations, and that's where it comes to so important to have your own birth support person that you've chosen really carefully and to support you through these thresholds and help carry you across to the other side, go through this rite of passage, this awesome challenge. And I love how you describe all the doula archetypes at the workshop that you ran for us at the home birth conference last year. I was just blown away, and I was like, that's it. It just helps me so much to understand when people employ me as a doula, what archetype they're almost seeing in me or looking for or wanting from me. You can feel that as a doula. But I think it would be really helpful for people to understand the different types of care that we can give. And what are they called again, your archetypes? How would you describe them?
Yes, so so first of all, just to put that context, I guess, that we have to remember that birth across time and cultures has been really sacred women's business, or women's business. And so that idea of archetypes is around, so Jung so beautifully talks about, it's like the deep, dry riverbeds that lay down tracks in the soil, that we know that when it rains, of course, the river is going to run down that same track that's been used over and over and over again. And he likens that to, in the deeper sort of collective unconscious, if you like, our deep primal shared evolutionary history, that the things that in life have been within certain patterns over and over and over again are laying down these ideas, these sort of formats, these frameworks that he calls archetypes. I think it's a beautiful language and way to describe it. And so if we're thinking about women in birth, then we're thinking about, well, what across time and cultures would be to have certain women around the birthing woman. And so that even for contemporary women now, there's something that can be stirring in them about feeling that need for particular energy to be around them. But the social and cultural message is more or less saying to them, well, you'll probably have an obstetrician, you might have a midwife, you'll have the father of the baby if he's going to be part of the ongoing life of the baby, and that's who you're choosing. But the psychological stirring of the archetypes is looking for particular qualities of care to match this sort of deeply primal experience. So I'm hoping I'm explaining that in a way that
makes total sense. Women have been with women since the beginning of time, and the river flowing. For those of you who don't know, we're talking about Carl Jung, and I always had a conflict in my family because my mum's Jungian and my father's Freudian, so it's always been a bit of a dilemma. But archetypes exist in our subconscious. There are ways, and this is like the underlying territory of the mind and how it works. So, yeah, it makes total sense what you're saying.
I started to think about birth like this quite some years ago when it just happened that here in Melbourne, for a period of a few years, I just happened to be, yourself, Nadine, is as a doula, if you're invited to somebody and it works well, then maybe they tell their friends and their friends and their friends, and next thing you're in a bit of a network. So I was just in the network of lots of the actors in the scene here, and so they would always talk about, not so much about birth, but they're always talking about, well, in this play, what are the archetypes we're working with? In that screenplay, where are we going to fit this archetype? In this, so there are many people who it's just their bread and butter to be thinking in this way, but maybe not for all of us. So I started to think about, well, okay, what's going on in birth? So the archetypes, of course, then I feel are firstly the mother, for the mothering. And of course, we know that a lot of the early doula work, the people who researched that and talked about it, that they talk about the mothering the mother. This is one of the strongest yearnings need for that new mother stepping into that rite of passage, through that labour being the enactment of that rite of passage, that new vulnerable mother is being mothered by the mother figure. That's a bit more complex for many of us now because we may or may not be so close to our mother, or we might be very close to our mother and want our mothers to be present at the birth. But, we've been disturbing birth now for at least 4 generations. And so for the woman who wants to have a go at normal physiological childbirth, and she feels very much that she wants to have her mother and that energy, that archetypal energy, as well as that being performed by her own mother, that can be a bit fraught because perhaps the mother doesn't know and trust what normal physiological childbirth is, and so then in those vulnerable moments, then that can be challenging.
Absolutely.
So sometimes, then, particularly now, if I'm at birth, then mother archetype would be projected onto me because I'm the age difference between myself and the women that I'm working with. So, and maybe I can fulfill that. I can't be their mother. I'm not wanting to be their mother, but in that urgency and the intensity of a labour, I can fulfill something of that nurturing mother energy, which is part of that archetypal yearning. Back in the early days, I think that for any of us who are still in the realm of having our own children and are called to birth through, perhaps as we talked about before, through the birth experiences that we have with our own children being less than favourable and coming into activation to become doulas. Often we're in the life stage that we might call sister, so the sister archetype. So sometimes we're called into birth to carry that sister archetype, where there's generally an age merge, but certainly it's a life stage merge, so that being called to a birth to offer that sister energy is another one of the archetypes. There's also, across Samoan cultures, of course, there's always been those birthing goddess archetypes who are, and many cultures, of course, have them in particular form. We think about some of the birthing goddesses from South America and from Greek history, Irish, English, many birth goddesses and what they visually look like. And so the idea of the birthing goddess is, of course, watching over and giving inspiration. And so sometimes women are seeking that in the people that they might be inviting into the birth, because it may be somebody who they know has had a very straightforward birth or has come through a strong and challenging birth and has made her way through it and to stand in solid ground as a mother, and so they might want that energy. And then, of course, another archetype which is so strong and needed so much more at present is the wounded healer archetype. So the wounded healer archetype, of course, comes when somebody has been wounded in a particular, sometimes it's generalized, but in this case, wounded in birth, but has done that work to come to a place to claim that strengthened place about birth. And so again, for me, I would think that at birth I carry wounded healer energy as well, because of that wounding with my own daughter's first birth and then working all of that through to come to a different place for my next daughter's births, and also into this realm of working in birth more generally. So some people, that women might feel to choose to come to their birth, maybe the wounded healer dynamic has come out of other life stories that they've been wounded by and have really done the work to earn that place of healer. They might choose that particular quality. So it's a strong quality. And as I say, there's so much wounding happening at birth now that I think that wounded healer archetype is much, much needed.
Yeah, it is.
There's also, of course, the true midwife archetype. And there have always, across time and cultures, been those women who have that special and often sacred, mysterious knowledge of, could range from, herbs and lotions and potions and words and particular physical movements and what have you, but it's also like an embodied sense of trust in birth. So women, so they're those key archetypes, I think, that are part of that sort of yearning picture, but socially and culturally. So that can be happening and women not really being conscious about it, but it's like that all of that often gets projected onto their partner, who, if their partner is a male, the father of their baby, which is more generally the case, although if it is a female partner, then maybe the female partner could carry some of those, if she's given birth herself, she could carry some of those archetypal forms, but pretty much these men who we've called into this birth space have this sort of yearning and projection to them as if they should know exactly like a mother would, exactly to know what to say and what to do and how to touch, and
I know,
like a midwife would to know exactly what to do here, and like a sister would, and we wonder that they find that a bit difficult.
I know, the poor guys and partners, like it's just, we expect so much of our partners, and it's partly because of the way our society is created, the nuclear family and this independence and isolation. But I think understanding these archetypes can help so many people understand then what they might be projecting or expecting, and also help them make a choice around the right doula person, support person for them to help their birth process, and brings to the forefront of the mind that, healing our relationship with our mothers as best we can prior to giving birth, prior to becoming a mother, is often a necessary step to start processing that as well. Because that definitely comes into play.
Definitely. I mean, really, archetypes can be... So, I mean, a lot of people are probably familiar with that idea around that there are shadow parts of ourselves, so the positive and the negative, or the shadow, and archetypes too can have so we can have the exaggeration of the perfect mother, which many women in pregnancy hold anyway, that they're going to be that perfect mother. They're not going to be that imperfect mother that our own mother was, of course. Just a good enough mother, that's good enough. Nobody's a perfect mother. But so, or the perfect sister, or the good enough sister, or so on. So sometimes women might be choosing somebody out of that archetypal yearning, expecting perfection in that role, the aspiration of the perfection in that role. But of course, sometimes that person doesn't even realize that that's what's being projected onto them, and or in fact their context of their relationship is not that can be fulfilled anyway, so that sometimes shadow signs come out and women feel betrayed, or they feel abandoned, or it's important to understand it, but there's probably a bit more depth that has to be understood around that, because it can also backfire some of that if everybody's coming into that birth space and not really conscious around what some of those deeper processes are. I guess, say, if we're just thinking about the mother, or it could be the sister anyway, or any of them, not so much the wounded healer, because the wounded healer wouldn't go into this realm, but let's stay with the mother. So if the mother, some of the mothering energy is to nurture and to protect and to offer love to the pregnant woman, the birthing woman, but of course the woman might be choosing a mother and may have that aspirational thought that I want to have a go at normal physiological childbirth. But then in the midst of a crisis of confidence, and she's feeling like, no, now I need the epidural, and the mother who she's got there, who she feels is going to support her, but the mother might also be thinking, yes, she does need the epidural at this point. She needs to be saved. The poor thing, get caught in a sympathy. And the whole thing then starts to go down that more medical track, and after the birth, some women feel like they're perhaps betrayed by their mother or their partner or somebody who can't really hold that as a potency of supporting the work of it, the challenge of it, and not wanting to get caught in that sympathy loop of needing to save her. So it's a powerful part of it, but it's still being enacted, if you like, in the context of the social milieu that now births are happening in. But it's a juicy part to think about, isn't it?
It is. It's so important, and I love the fact that you bring our attention to the shadow side of all things, the shadow side of these archetypes, and there's great power in choice. There's great power in this generation now of women looking for a sense of control, but there is a shadow side to it, and we need to be mindful. There's a shadow side to everything. And there's beauty in everything. It's just at the end of the day, it's what you choose, and every choice you make has a consequence. Yes. And be as informed as you can in your own self, but also of the culture and the context that you're birthing within, I think is deeply empowering. And I know every mum that has a question or concern about pain, we direct to you, and anyone that's ready to look into processing and preparing for their birth on a deeper level, we send towards you. And all of your work is so helpful in diving deeper into the intricacies and the subtleties of what's at play, which so few people actually go into or consider. But I think it's really important. So is there anything else you would say, Rhea, to a first or second time mum or partner out there who are preparing for their birth? What would you say to them?
First of all, really, the research would back exactly what you and I would say, and that is that they would be looking for continuity of care. In Australia at the moment, so that's continuity of care, midwifery care, gold standard, across the world, but in Australia really at present time only 8% of women get to access that, so it's a challenge for them to find it. And sometimes, of course, they can't find it on offer in the places where they're birthing, and so then this is where the work of the doula often comes into play in order to get that continuity. But somebody who knows you, knows your story, knows about birth, knows what you're wanting, and that you're wanting to have somebody. That continuity, of course, needs to be taking on board the aspect about pain. So you're wanting somebody who knows. We frame it sort of more or less in terms of Nikki Leap's work, Professor Nikki Leap's work around her research into midwives and their attitudes towards pain in labour. She framed it that there are midwives who are much more in more of a medical frame, appropriate for hospitals where things are, people are in their illness. So that's pain relief. So people have pain relief ideas and feel like when the mother is discomforted, then she should have this drug or that drug or the epidural, of course. Or is the continuity of care that they're working with, the midwife and or the doula or whatever, more in the frame of the working with pain, understanding all this positivity. And so, your personal trainer might have more to offer you than sometimes some of the midwives who feel like they want to save you because that's their frame. So continuity of care has got to be placed in that context as well around the pain issue. But mostly the midwives who work in continuity of care are certainly that working with pain midwife who understands the importance and the benefits. The other thing I would say to women having their first babies, because they are going to, as soon as they're pregnant, of course, they're going to be bombarded with birth stories. Any birth story they hear, they really need to be having excavating something of the context of that woman's choices, the context of where she gave birth, what her attitudes were, what she was looking for out of her birth and so forth, and not just take in a birth story as if this is just as likely to happen to you as it was to her.
I know, isn't it terrible? People hear these stories and they're like, in their minds, all of a sudden a wiring happens. It's like, that is the gospel according to one, and I shall take it on. They have to be conscious that is going on a lot of the time. And I think that's great. Be aware that this woman made choices. She gave birth in a particular place. Be conscious of what you're taking in and so on. And
maybe the third thing I would say is if they wait till next year when the book that I'm working on now, which is talking much more about this emotional, psychological, the wild cards, the archetypes and what have you. So maybe they could read it next year and get a little bit more insight into some of the things we've been talking about. Hopefully. I'm in a crisis of confidence about it.
You're in transition. Don't worry, sweetie. You can do it. You can do it. You're doing it. It's just Heartbreak Hill.
It's Heartbreak Hill, yeah.
That's right. I really look forward to your new book. I can't wait to read about wild cards and archetypes in more depth, because that's definitely, again, another totally unspoken body of work that needs to be brought into the consciousness. So I'm so grateful. I'm so glad that you're doing it. What are you thinking of calling it, Rhea?
That's, of course, the first question. But what I say, of course, I'm immersed in the birth world, and lots of people have a range of names for their babies, and they're going to wait until they see and they meet this baby before they decide what that book in my case, or the baby's name is going to be.
Yeah.
The name hasn't come to me yet, just the concept is happening.
That's great. It will name itself, just like our little bubbas do as well. They come through, and absolutely it becomes just very clear when it's meant to. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being on the She Births show. Thanks for all the hard work that you've done and all the intuition and observation and love that you've brought to the birthing sphere and the wisdom that you've shared in your writing. And we're going to have links in our show notes and ways for people to get in touch with you and all the references to studies that you've mentioned today. So people can go to those, and we will hopefully speak to you again when you've published your new book.
Yes, please. Let's do that. Thank you. And we have to thank, really all those delicious babies who teach us a thing or two, yeah?
That's right. Listen to the bubbas. That's right. I'm Nadine Richardson, and you've been listening to the She Births Show podcast, proudly brought to you by Water Wipes, the world's purest baby wipes, made of 99.9% water and a drop of fruit extract. If you have enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to our future conversations and leave us a review, and we'd love to know what you would like to hear more of. You can find me and my team of certified educators at shebirths.com and become a part of our community on Instagram and Facebook. In the App Store, you can download our SheBirths app filled with lots of freebies and the full online SheBirths program. And remember, when it comes to having a better birth and easier transition into parenthood, education is empowerment.